Hello, class. Welcome to the next segment in week 2. And in this segment, we're going to take a look at the last operation that you can have inside of an if statement, which is the not equal to operator. And we're also going to talk a little bit about the idea of putting an if statement within an if statement, which is something that you can do. But first, let's go ahead and tackle the idea of the not equal sign the not equal to operator, or the not equal sign in Python. So up until this point, we've been working with 5 main operators. We've been asking if a variable or something is equal to something else. We've asked if something is greater than something else. We've asked if something is less than something else. We've asked if something is greater than or equal to something else. And we've asked if something is less than or equal to something else. Now we're going to take a look at how you can get the computer to ask if something is simply not equal to something else. And that's accomplished by using the following character sequence here. So again, same if statements that we've had before. The setup is very much the same, except here, if we want the computer to ask if something is not equal to something else, that utilizes the following character sequence that you see here. That involves an exclamation mark appearing directly in front of an equal sign. And just like the rule that we talked about in the previous segment about greater than or equal to and less than or equal to, the order here is in fact strictly enforced, and it is important. The exclamation mark must appear in front of the equal sign in order for the computer to actually make sense of this. If you don't adhere to that order, the computer will either do something you don't want it to, or it will give you an error message, which I guess getting an error message is also can also qualify as the computer doing something you don't want it to. But by specifically, I mean the computer might act oddly. It might not do what you expect it to do. That's what I mean by the computer doing something you don't want it to do. But if we want to go through the same walkthrough that we had before, so here we have the variable x, and we're asking if that is not equal to 100. So again, if this condition is met, the condition that we have here in the if statement, if that is in fact the case, if that is true, then just like any other if statement, what appears directly below it, which is indented, will be something that the computer acts on. In this case, it will print out x is not equal to 100. And we can also do something like the following. We can ask if the variable x is not equal to the variable y, and we can see for ourselves that x is 10, y is 15. Those values are in fact not equivalent. So this condition here, since we're asking if x is not equal to y, this entire condition is in fact met. So that means that this indented print statement is something that the computer will act on as well. So since both of our conditions here are in fact met, then we would expect that both of these indented print statements will in fact be produced in the console when we go to run this. And if we want to verify that for ourselves, we can go ahead and run this program, and you can see we get x is not 100, and we also get x and y are not equal, since both of these conditions were in fact satisfied. And if I want to go through and change some of these values, so here I'll make sure that x and y are in fact the same value. So this condition up here will still produce the same result. X is now 15, which is not equal to 100, which means that this print statement, this indented print statement, is something the computer will act on. But now this condition on line 7 will fail, because now if we're asking the computer to test if x is not equal to y, we can see that x and y are in fact equivalent, which means this condition now fails, meaning this indented statement is something the computer will completely ignore. And by that expectation, we would only expect the computer to print out x is not 100, and you can see we do in fact get only that print statement since this condition now fails, with x and y now being equivalent. So that's a look at the not equal to operator. Now let's also take a look at the idea of putting an if statement within an if statement, which I'll go ahead and enable that portion of the program. So sort of had the same thing that we had earlier. So here we have the same if statement that we had before, and here we're asking if the variable x is equal to 10. And since we can see x is equal to 10, that means everything inside this print statement is, or excuse me, everything inside this if statement, which is indicated by the indented blocks, everything that is indented is now subject to run if this condition is in fact met. So if this condition is met, then the very first thing that the computer will do is it will print out x is equal to 10. Then there's nothing on line 19. And then down here on line 20, we have another if statement. So we have an if statement contained within an if statement here. And on line 20, we're asking if x is equal to y, if the values of x and y are equal to each other. And you'll notice how this print statement has an extra level of indentation here. So if you look at just all of these statements that I have highlighted here, since those are all indented once, or indented consistently, more or less, then you can see how all of this stuff is subject to run if this condition up here is met. But now to distinguish this if statement from this if statement up here, we have an extra level of indentation here. So this extra level of indentation tells the computer that this statement right here should only run if this condition up here is met. But if this condition up here is met, then everything that's indented will be something the computer can act on. But by having the if statement within an if statement, we need an extra level of indentation here to tell the computer that this print statement on line 21 is part of this if statement. And similarly, this print statement on line 23 is only to be acted on if this condition on line 22 is in fact satisfied, if that is in fact met. So to sort of summarize what the computer is going to do here, so again, we can see x is equal to 10, which satisfies this condition on line 17. So it's going to run through all the indented statements. So it's going to start off by printing out x is equal to 10. Now it's going to test this. It's going to ask if x and y are equal to each other, which we can see is clearly not the case. We see that x is 10, y is 15, so that condition fails, which means this print statement on line 21 is completely ignored. And then on line 22, we're asking if x is not equal to y. Again, that's the not equal to operator. And we can see that condition will in fact be met. So that means that the computer is going to print out and x is not equal to y. So after all of this is said and done, the computer should print out x is equal to 10 and x is not equal to y. And if we run the program to verify that assertion, we do in fact get that result. Now I'm going to go ahead and change a value up here. So here I'm going to change the value of x to be 15. And as sort of an exercise to kind of check your understanding, I'll go ahead and ask you to pause the video and try to figure out what the program is actually going to print out or do with these values of x and y that you see on the screen here, and with the rest of the program being unchanged. So I'll give you a few seconds to do that. So hopefully the answer that you arrived at will be what you see on the screen here. And the answer to the question, what is this program going to do now, is going to do absolutely nothing. It is not going to print anything out. And the reason why is because if we look at this condition down here, this if statement on line 17, we're asking if x is equal to 10. We can see that x is equal to 15, which means this condition fails, which means everything that's indented below that on line 17 is completely ignored. Since this condition fails, it's no longer relevant whether x is equal to y or if x is not equal to y, because the computer never reaches that point. And the reason why the computer never reaches any of the statements in here is because this condition on line 17 failed. Since that condition on line 17 failed, anything that's indented below that is no longer subject to run. So the computer is not going to act on anything that's indented below line 17 since this condition failed. And that, by extension, that means the computer is not going to check if x is equal to y, and it's also not going to check this condition on line 22. However, if I were to go back up here and change the value of x and y to both be equal to 10, now this condition is satisfied, which means the computer is able to act on anything that appears as part of this indented block below the if statement, which means the computer can now print out x is equal to 10. It can also now act on these conditions on line 20 and 22. So now x and y are equivalent, so now the computer will print out x is equal to 10 and x is equal to y. But this condition on line 22 now fails since x is now equal to y, then we can no longer say that x is not equal to y, which means that this indented statement on line 23 is going to be ignored. And just to verify that result, we do in fact get this. And if we go back to the result that we had here, just to show you that this does in fact produce nothing, something I probably should have done earlier on, but you can see this does not do anything when we tell the program to run. Just to verify that is in fact the correct assessment. So that's going to do it for this other segment on if statements. And in the next segment, we're going to introduce the idea of an if-else setup. So with that, I will see you all in the next segment.